Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Cove Podcast. I'm Captain Todd Lempar, your regular host. And today, on today's episode, we're going to talk about the 1st Recruit Training Battalion, but more broadly, how to train recruits. My guest today, or co-host, is Corporal Jade Numans. He's a current recruit instructor at 1RTB, or the 1st Recruit Training Battalion at Kapooka. And he's been in the role for 2 years and about to culminate at the end of his posting and post out. But I sort of want to use this opportunity to learn more about the organisation and what your role is as a recruit instructor. But welcome to the podcast, Jade.
Thanks for having me.
First, for the listeners that haven't been through 1RTB, and everyone has their own opinions about, we talked about this in the RMC episode last year about, we have these rosy coloured glasses about the organisations we've been through or we've never been through, but we only hear about what the organisation does and what a recruit instructor does. In your words from being there for 2 years, what does 1RTB or the Recruit Training Battalion, what does it achieve for Army?
1RTB provides Army its ORs, both part-time and full-time, and prepares those ORs for employment, initial employment training. So it gives them the basic soldierly skills required to be a soldier.
That's an important point. It's almost the same. Every single person goes through the same experience. Is that broadly what you could argue?
Essentially, that's what we're attempting to achieve, yeah.
How's the organisation structured? You have a number of different, it's like any generic standard infantry battalion, I suppose. You have companies and platoons, but how large? It's a huge organisation. How large is it?
Yeah, it's quite big. So we have 4 full-time training companies. Each can have 6 platoons at a maximum. We have a part-time training company, much the same. We also have a training support company and a recruit development company, which each have their own functions.
So the 4 companies that do the regular training, much the same. How long's the recruit training for those companies?
Currently, the recruit training is 9 weeks. Previously, last year it was 12 weeks, and there may be some changes coming up.
So we'll talk about a more compressed training continuum as we get into the podcast. But I want to draw it back to your experience, I suppose, over the last couple of years, but also your current role. What is being a recruit instructor? What is a recruit instructor?
A recruit instructor is the kind of the first point of contact really for a soldier's journey. So as a recruit instructor at 1RTB, you get your own section, of course, typically of 10 to 15 people. And your role is to train those people to be ready for Army in all the basic soldierly skills, things like drill, weapons, fieldcraft, and in addition, platoon sergeants and platoon commanders teach radios and navigation and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I always remember when I went through with the platoon commanders, it was like here and now having been a troop commander, I was like, we got shafted with those nav lessons, because you're delivering the nav theory. So all these recruits are sitting in a classroom and the lieutenant waltzes in and teaches like theory of navigation and their heads are just hitting the tables because it's so they get super sleepy.
Yeah, so I've been present for one of those navigation theory lessons and yeah, it's terrible. So the platoon commanders will do that boring nav theory stuff. And then when it comes to the practical application, the R.I.s take over and get to go out with the recruits, which is obviously the good stuff.
The awesome hands-on part, yeah. So that's more broadly, I suppose, what they go through in the training institution. But your job as a corporal and as a recruit instructor is unique in that some would argue you have the most influence inside the organisation because you have you talked about 15 people in a platoon, 15 to 20. You have a section for the whole duration of that, now 9 weeks. How important is your job on the ground with your section?
It's huge, yeah. So the section commander role, filled by corporals, is the primary role of the entire battalion. And everything else within the battalion kind of exists to support the role of the section commanders.
Talk to that component of how involved you are with the recruits from they're civilians before they get to you, and then vice versa. At the end of that 9 weeks, they're sort of like they're privates. Then they're not recruits. So what sort of the R.I.s involvement across that sort of full continuum?
It's very involved and very full on. So we start with them coming off the bus and going into the bulletin centre that all ORs will remember being lined up in their platoons with the platoon sergeant calling their name. They'll leave the centre and they'll be collected by their section commander. which is where we come in. And we'll take them down to the company, give them a very brief tour, and start getting them prepared, getting them into the appropriate clothing, getting them prepared for learning basic drill, just so they can move around the battalion. And from there, the central focus is the relationship between the R.I.s and the recruits to their section. And so from there, you're involved in their lives every day. So going through all the drill lessons with them, everything from the very beginning, turns on the dot and salutes on the dot and all that kind of business. And then going through teaching them every lesson they need to know for the EF88 and the F89. Also being safety staff and coaching them whilst they're on the range. Going through for their Army first aid training, tactical care of the combat, casualty, you're there for absolutely everything. And it really culminates with the field phase, where you take your section out and you conduct infantry minor tactics, essentially, the basic skills that all soldiers need to know. And then after all that's complete, once the recruits have achieved all those milestones, they march out, and you're there for that as well. And the march out parade is obviously the culmination of that journey that the recruits and the section commanders have shared to get the recruits qualified. And it's really impactful.
Yeah, I think I remember the first day, like, get your suitcase in your left hand, start marching breast pocket height, and you're like, I have no idea what's happening. And I suppose you guys are the first ones to receive that. And I view that as complete shock of like what is happening right now. Are most of them shocked, I suppose? Oh,
yeah, very much so. And you can see the moment they get off the bus, they don't know what's happening. And it's funny you mentioned get your briefcase in your left hand, because there's the specificity of what you need these recruits to do, from whether it's where they hold things in their hands, how they make a bed, how they knock on a door, how they walk down a hallway. It's ridiculous. And the amount of information that you're trying to cram in these recruits' heads within such a short time frame makes for some very funny and interesting interactions.
Do they ever come up to you at the end of, you do march out parade, and like my arbitrary understanding is that you'll move back to a lunch or something, a official function with their family and stuff. They're obviously telling stories to their families about what the last, 9 weeks or 12 weeks has been about. Have you got any, do they come up to you and talk about those moments that you may have completely forgotten about, but at march out, have they ever approached you and been like, do you remember that time you did this?
They do. But in addition to that, there's an actual formal event for that, called the Skit Night, where the entire platoon will go up to the Wally Thompson, and if they've been good, meeting the standard, they'll get 1 or 2 beers. But the Skit Night is their chance to have a good laugh at the secos, like their official chance. And there's no rules. If you need to refresh everyone's memory about some stupid mistake that a section commander made, or another recruit. This is your chance to really actually take the piss out of him. And some comedy gold comes out of it. And there's nothing better than having the piss taken out of you by recruits when they're given the opportunity. It's always a good laugh.
Especially for things you probably weren't aware that you were doing, little nuances and stuff that you didn't know.
Yeah, and that's what gets people. Is when they've got that little tick. And then everyone's like, yeah, man, we always knew you had that. But it took a recruit to bring it up to them before they ever became aware of it. It's good.
Yeah, I think we've all been through that on the other end as well, and done some like ridiculous stuff, thinking like, why did I just do that? But it's because so much is coming in, and you're just trying to keep sort of tread water to stay afloat, I suppose, for that, particularly for that first bit where you're learning how to just move around, and treating people. Yeah. So you talked about the section thing. I suppose you go out, culminate, and you talked about culminating in a section sort of field phase. I suppose is that the component where you get away from the barracks environment and take that section, your section, who you've had for weeks now, and like you talked about before, the involvement, you're literally waking them up and putting them to bed for the first at least 4 weeks, sort of thing, before you proceed into like thinning out the staff. But in that first bit, incredibly involved, all the way through to like when you get cut a section boundary and you get to go out with your section in isolation and teach them everything you thought you wanted to know, plus, obviously the learning management package dictate what you should teach them as well. But that must be incredibly rewarding to go through that sort of process.
Yeah, absolutely. And you watch them turn from civilians into soldiers. And not only do you watch that, you're instrumental in that, which is awesome. And like you identified a little bit earlier, you go through a progression. So that first 3 weeks is full on, and it needs to be full on. Once they are promoted from their red tabs to their blue tabs, things kind of, relax a little bit. The standard still needs to be maintained, but all of a sudden hats are off. You're not yelling all the time. And then they progress to gold tabs, which typically happens around the field phase, pretty much right on there. And when you're out in the field environment, it is a lot more relaxed. Obviously, it's quite demanding what we need to have them do out there, as everyone knows. But you can take a more relaxed approach, and you can understand and trust that they know what they need to be doing as soldiers, and so you have that leniency to be a bit more relaxed with them.
You talked before about 12 weeks used to be 80 days, and now it's sort of 9 weeks, a more compressed training continuum. I heard you mention before about red, blue, and gold tabs. Like, obviously that has not changed. There's still that normal progression that everyone would have gone through, getting their blue tabs and being able to have some personal freedom and walk around in 2s and 3s for the first time. That no change to that.
No, that's all the same. And any OR coming back as an instructor will see a lot that they've already seen. The primary difference would be the quality of training that the recruits receive now compared to, say, what I received 17 years ago. And no doubt what you received when you came through, the quality of, or the standard of training is incredible.
Explain that point. What do you mean by an incredible standard of training?
So there's a few areas, but the two primary areas that spring to mind immediately, combat behaviors. So the way that the soldier interacts with the weapon system, and using a whole bunch of techniques and procedures that we never got taught back in 2007. So using the workspace, the way that one reloads a weapon system, covering and all that kind of stuff, the way that you use cover, including when you're doing rifle practice shoots on the range, the expectation of the recruit is a lot higher than it used to be. And in addition to that, tactical care of the combat casualty, something that has come out in Army in the past 6-7 years.
Yeah, formalised, yeah.
Yeah, correct. Yep. And that's now taught at 1RTB, and they need to know that as a method to progress. So those are two examples of quality training that have just way over what we used to get.
Yeah, because we went down recently and visited the ADFA guys and girls that are down on being trained. They do a 4-week stint at Kapooka doing some of that basic skill stuff. So at the finish, like when they finished their first year of ADFA, and I still remember people saying like, and this would have never happened, a decade ago or something, but that basically talking about how they failed to shoot because as they were doing an E-reload, their foot was hanging out the edge of of a bollard, so they weren't taking complete cover, which is completely contrast to our live fire shoots where you were on your guts, like just in the open, just trying to get as tight a grouping as you can. I suppose it's completely changed the complexity of that. So they shoot an awesome score, but still fail on the basis that they aren't taking cover during reloading or observing those or displaying those combat behaviours.
Yeah, 100%. And you hear a lot about people complaining, the quality of soldiers getting pumped out of 1RTB now is diminished from what it used to be. That's not the case at all. And in particular, the intellectual demands imposed upon the recruits to get through the course are higher than they've ever been.
Because of that complexity, I suppose, of the scenarios you put them through, as opposed to some of the stuff that was the case, decades ago, somewhat more simplistic.
Yeah, absolutely. You're giving them more to think about and to respond to and to react to.
A number of listeners will be like, you just talked about the standard of recruit, and I suppose I want to come back to that point. Like, do you, in your observation, having been there for 2 years and done a number of raises and then subsequent complete platoons through and marched out, have the standards of recruit lowered over, with the changes in training continuum and, differences in recruiting from your perspective on the ground, have the standards lowered?
Not at all. So the first thing to say about that is obviously you get a very diverse group of people that come through 1RTB, some with much higher skill sets, some with much lower skill sets, and they can only progress through RTB obviously if they meet the standards required. On occasion, we do get people who are of such a high skill set that you realise, or ability, that you think, okay, this guy was put on the wrong bus because he should have gone to RMC, which is an absolute pleasure to see. Of those standards, intellectually, much more demanding, as I kind of alluded to before. One criticism that is brought up in relation to standards of recruits is the physical fitness standard. Now, from my day, things have, in some cases, been increased or imposed upon the recruits as a higher standard. For instance, the PESA. So when I came through Kapuka, PESA was not a thing, obviously introduced a few years into my time. And now that's something that they need to complete, the all-core PESA. Another point of contention in particular is the BFA or the PFA standards required of the recruits, particularly to exit 1RTB. So it used to be the case that to leave 1RTB, you needed to be able to pass the BFA for your age and gender. And now that is no longer the case. They do a diagnostic. And I see that concern. However, I would like to think that the amount of push-ups somebody can do is not going to have much to do with whether or not we can teach them how an engine works.
That's specific to the job, but also like I want to acknowledge, I suppose, the point now the training continuum is shortened to what we had for 80 days, 80 plus days is now 9 weeks. And we'll get into the changes as you observe them. But like, so they now, if we were to expect them to meet the same physical standards, but they have far less time to do it in the 9 weeks. And I imagine the training is far more compressed. So it's probably not okay to expect the exact same thing. So that diagnostic and then allowing them to continue to develop their strengths so they don't get injured throughout their employment training, that it's just shifted the goalposts, I suppose, rather than drop the standards. And everyone argues, oh, it's lower now. And they sort of overemphasize how much a BFA indicates how well you are going to be as a soldier. So I suppose 9 weeks now, we probably can't expect the same physical standards from people. You talked about the difference in people. There'll be people coming that played professional rugby, absolutely no issues whatsoever. And then someone who has never played a team sport and is far more likely to be injured as a result. I suppose with the reduction in the training continuum comes somewhat of a different physical standard at the completion of that. And then it just shifts the goalpost into employment training. Is that fair to say?
To some degree, yeah. And in some cases, that is a concern. So if you are going into, or the recruit rather is going into a combat corps where a lot more is going to be demanded of them physically in a shorter period of time, I understand those concerns. But when we have other corps, non-combat corps, say somebody's going to the Army School of Electrical Mechanical Engineers or the Army School of Health or something like that, and they've got an extended period of IETs, there's no need to have them be able to meet a particular BFA standard in order to progress through that training. And indeed, the training's long enough that they can obviously spend time developing their fitness there to be ARN compliant and employable once they leave the IET.
Let's go back to that compressed training continuum. But so you've obviously you've ran some the longer courses for the entire duration of your 2 years, but now we've got to a more compressed 9 week, as you described it, continuum. What have you seen in changes?
So the training required and the standard required of the recruits is largely the same, and it has just been compressed in the most part. So what that has done is standards remain the same, amount of time provided has decreased. And what that gives us, particularly as recruit instructors, is less time to develop people who need a little bit of extra attention or they need a little bit of extra help. A good example would be learning a new complex skill set like a weapon system, how a weapon system functions and how to employ a weapon system. During the 12-week course, you could take extra time to assist people to get to the standard, and quite often they could. Now, if the new 9-week course, the 9-week course that's been adopted this year, my understanding is that there's a lot less free time to get those people up to speed, which consequently could increase the amount of people back squatted for failing to meet a standard within the training program within the required time.
You talked about the standard is the same throughout, more compressed timing. Have they dropped anything out of the training continuum, noting that it is now 9 weeks?
A little bit, surprisingly little. The only thing that springs to mind immediately is the briefs which you'll fondly remember from Defence Bank and Australian Military Bank. I'm sure there's some other small things like that. However, the practical skills required of a recruit and all the additional training that they go through has largely remained the same.
So recruits in general, we talk about diverse backgrounds, and I suppose now a compressed training continuum. I want to sort of lean in on your job a bit more, but not so much from your role, but more so, more broadly, I suppose, why did you want to go back to Kapuka as an RI? And yeah, what were your thoughts behind going back?
Personally, I have a real interest in mentorship, and that was a big driving factor to me going back to 1RTB. And in addition, I knew that going to 1RTB would be like quite good for my career. So those were two primary reasons that I requested to go. Before I went, I believed it's going to be very reggy, very strict environment, not very enjoyable. And honestly, I was not really looking forward to coming to 1RTB, even though I had requested the posting.
Here's some horror stories. It's like we were talking pre-episode, but about like it's equivalent. I likened it to Darwin. Like no one wants to post in Darwin, but as soon as you get there, you're like, I need to go back, or I absolutely love it up here and stuff. I think somewhat similar is Kapuka. It's like no one really wants to go there, but I asked a number of people in constructing some of the questions for this episode, what their time was like, and they all just tell all these stories about how good it is, and then basically say, I want to go back, or my time there was awesome. I suppose, is that the same perception you had going in? It's just like, it's a Reggie place, and I'm not really keen on going there, but it's good for my career, and I should get some good development opportunities. Was that the feel?
Yeah, that's a fair summation. I was expecting on day one to be yelled at by a crusty warrant officer to get off the grass, but that didn't happen to my surprise.
I still remember that story of like the recruits get their phone for the first time and they're trying to find reception. So they start to like wander around on their phone trying to find reception, and then wander into the middle of the parade ground. And you talked about not giving them, you're basically trying to teach them in the first couple of weeks how to not get in trouble, basically, is like the simplistic part of it. And then you see them cruising around trying to get reception in the middle of the parade ground. I imagine they'd like get a bit of a ripping at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's a lot of reasons to enjoy the role as a recruit instructor. One of my personal favorites is those lapses of judgment or social faux pas committed by the recruits just because they're not aware. And that's a really enjoyable aspect of the job as well, actually.
So you talked about the power imbalance or like power divide before, and that being, you expect a lot of things like professionalism from section commanders, not to abuse that sort of power. But there would be times where, especially when you're just learning and it's your first raise, or like, it might be, year two and you still, but do the recruits ever sort of get one up on you?
So I had this one recruit, I won't say his name, who got one up on me really good. So there's a few little bits and pieces to this one. So as everyone who's ever gone through Kapuka will remember, your pockets need to be zipped up at all times, constantly. And I'm big.
Otherwise you kill your platoon.
That's right. Yeah. Your whole section, your whole platoon will die if you leave one pocket unzipped. And so I'm big on that one. And the typical punishment for leaving a pocket open, because there's no real good practical way to retrain somebody to zip up a pocket because it's so simple. The punishment I'd typically give to somebody is, write 250 words on why you killed your section, your pocket should have been done up, something like that.
All been through it, yep.
Yeah, that's right. And so whenever you fault correct a recruit in relation to their pocket or anything like that, if you tell them there's something physically wrong on their person, the first thing they will do is they'll immediately look at it to identify the problem and confirm that what you've said is correct. And every time you'll say, would I lie to you? Don't look down, would I lie to you? And so that became another one. Don't look down. Don't look down. Make sure that you check hold on the admin line. You're 1 inch from the admin line. They'd immediately look down. Don't look down. Your pocket's undone. Don't look down. Would I lie to you? You know what I mean? And so it's a good bit of fun, and they realise, can't look down. I've got to play the game. My recruit instructor wouldn't lie to me. Anyway, so pockets are a big deal. And one day we're out the front of the wets and we're doing a range clearance or something like this. We're clearing webbing. And one of my recruits, this recruit in particular, tells me, Corporal, you've left your left map pocket undone.
That takes some big,
It does take some big balls. And I look down at my left map pocket and immediately he says, don't look down. and everyone has completely lost it. I look down, my pocket is not undone. And I said to this dude, he's a really socially adept person. So he knew when it was okay to have a joke. And I looked at him and I said, I'd better not catch you with your pocket undone ever again, And then I laughed and then I walked off. To his credit, never caught him with his pocket undone.
He was like hyper aware, like hyper fixated on pockets now.
It would have been his number one goal throughout the rest of the course.
Yeah.
And on that that particular recruit, and I like to keep track of what my recruits' accomplishments what my recruits have accomplished. This bloke in particular went on to go to 3RR and became one of the recipients of the Dog Cup the very next year, which is excellent.
So you talked about development. I just want to go back to that. Did you have a career interview beforehand or speak to your career manager about like going to Kabuka and what it was going to be like for your career? Or was it sold to you as an amazing opportunity to leap up the ranks, or like what was the conversation that was had?
It had been sold to me previously, but not by my career manager. So I think we all have a general understanding that going to training establishments is good to round out your career and boost your career profile a bit. When I talked to my career advisor, he was on board, and he didn't need to sell it to me because I was already keen to go, and he was happy to have me come down.
So do you find that motivation shifted once you got to Kabuka? Like, okay, so pre going in there, you're sort of thinking, oh, it'll be good for my career, and I'm motivated to mentor the recruits. You're also thinking that it's going to be the most Reggie organisation you've ever existed in, and it's going to be hard line, and you're going to be told like you're left and right of arc at all times. Now, having gone through 2 years of it, are all of those assumptions cleared and correct, or have you sort of completely changed your approach?
Almost all of my assumptions about 1RTB were incorrect. So the environment is a lot more relaxed, and the approach that is taken on a staff perspective is when you're at work, you're working and you're working hard. But if you don't need to be at work, don't be at work. Because there's a understanding that the job of a recruit instructor is quite demanding and quite full on. So you need to take every chance that you can to get out of the workplace and go rest and recuperate, and you really do need that time. As for the mentorship of recruits, which is, I think, probably the most rewarding aspect of employment at 1RTB, it's something that you can't do initially. The other point being the mentorship of recruits, which is the most rewarding aspect by far of employment at 1RTB. It's something that you can't dive into immediately. So as we said before, the first couple of weeks are pretty full on, and there's not a real chance for you to be quiet and calm down and take that more soft approach. That comes in about week 4, week 5. And in my opinion, although there are some great moments in the first couple of weeks of the course, when you get into week 4, week 5, you start doing weapons lessons and that kind of stuff, and you can drop the pace back a little bit, and you can calm down hats off style. That's when you can actually start developing a good rapport with the recruits, and you can actually feel a genuine impact on what you're doing. And it's not just barking orders, but you can see in their eyes that their mind's changing, they're learning things, which is what mentorship's all about.
Yeah, so that's probably, I suppose, to directly contrast your approach going in, that's the most sort of rewarding component, I suppose, is that mentorship. So for anyone who's like sort of thinking about it as a recruit instructor for a career progression type setup, are there any prerequisites to being an R.I.? Did you have any roadblocks along the way that you had to sort of jump over to get into the job?
No roadblocks per se, but yeah, there are some prerequisites, and you can do those in the year prior to posting in. So the first one is the MIC, the Military Instructor course. It's a 5-day course, general military instructor stuff. Yeah, the Small Arms coaching course, SAC, which is 6 days. And then now it's been brought back the RIC, Recruit Instructor course, as former R.I.s will remember it. And I'm not quite sure how long they're going to be taking for that one. I think it's something in the essence of 2 weeks.
Yeah, but they're prerequisites, I suppose. But more so, once you've got a posting to Kabuka, you can probably do the SAC and the military instructor course prior. But those don't need to be. You don't need to start those before you've got a posting. You basically, I assume, you received your posting and then started those sort of courses to get prepared for that January intake.
Yeah, that's correct. So you'd typically do them in the second half of the year prior to posting in. But if you're not able to, you can do them when you arrive at 1RTB after posting in, but that's not ideal.
Yeah, makes sense. And I want to talk about that not being ideal because I imagine like we all go into different units and think, wow, like deer in a headlights sort of thing. Be like, what's it going to be like? We ask as many people as we can, and then you get there and you're like, on receive for the first bit. I could only imagine that Kapuka is significantly more so than anywhere else, like intense for the instructors at first post in. Early January probably is when you'll come back. But what was your experience of posting into Kapuka? Having all the preconceptions that you had, what was it like?
On full receive is, yeah, exactly right. As a recruit instructor, you have no clue. You genuinely have no clue, and you walk in there and you don't know what's going on, and it's really funny because the recruits don't know that you don't know, but you know that you don't know, and all of your peers who also don't know that you don't know, and you become really heavily reliant on the senior recruit instructors from the year before. And even though you can do all the MIC and the SAC and the RIC and all the acronyms, you really are quite dependent on people who've already been there, and they really guide you through that whole process. And when it comes to full receive, my first 12-week course, I was on full receive for 12 weeks. And it's a real trial by fire, and consequently it's my favourite course I ever did, because whilst I was training the recruits, I was also being trained and I was learning, and we were all going through the fire together. The recruits just weren't aware of that.
There's that lot of smoke and mirrors, like, oh, they must know what they're doing. It's like, we have no idea. I'm just trying it. Yeah. So there's a number of, I don't know, how many recruit instructors are at corporal rank, secos? How many secos are posted at the unit? Because I suppose that's a positive. You have so many of your peers there. Is it well received when you first get to the unit? Are you well received? And subsequently, is it a good culture? You have your own. Now, I'm going to make a bold claim here and say that I think you have your own. It's not cool. It's not technically a mess, but it's basically a single rank mess, which is I think the Wally Thompson Club, which is corporals only club at Kapuka. Is the culture how well received were you, and what's the culture like?
So there's about 150 to 200 full tracks there. And the culture is quite insular. So if you're in Alpha Company, say, you're dealing with people in Alpha Company. And if you're in Bravo Company, you're dealing with people in Bravo Company. And you kind of get isolated into your own little areas. The Wally Thompson Club is the only corporal's mess in the Australian Army. That's correct. And it acts as a place to break down those barriers, and section commanders can come and have a beer and unwind when they have the time. And look, I'll be honest with you, I wish it were busier, but because the recruit instructor role is so busy, it's quite often to go up to Wally T and it's empty. And you'll be there with whoever you brought there, typically at the end of a night on a normal session, to have a beer and discuss how the day went and what your plans are moving forward.
And that deals with the huge number of secos that are posted to the institution. But then I suppose, so you get in, you find your feet-ish. When do you start your first course intake? I suppose it differs. It depends on what company and when the intakes are. But like, can you start an intake immediately, or is it somewhat like, is there a few weeks to find your feet?
The shortest I've heard of was 1 week. So within a week of posting in, some recruit instructors were straight into it. And then depending on the way the raises are going throughout the year, it could be even 2-3 months, perhaps longer. For me, it was 3 weeks, and I felt like 3 weeks is like quite good to get a grip and of what's going on, get your bearings, and to practice all your lessons and that kind of thing before the recruits rock up.
I talked about the intense, or inferred that it was intense for the first period. I suppose 3 weeks, you said, is a sweet spot because you get a little bit of time to find your feet and then launch into your first raise, like rather than sitting around not doing anything for a couple of months. So you get into that first raise. What's it like once you're in session? Like once that ball starts rolling and the recruits start getting off the bus, what's it like for you?
Oh, it's full on. It's absolutely full on. And you're just not, I wouldn't say redlining, but you were just flat out all the time, especially for your first session. So for your first session, like I said, you're learning. You're constantly learning all the time, and you don't know where you need to be and when you need to be and what you need to know. And it means that you spend a lot of time worrying or being at work when you don't really need to be at work, or paying attention to things that you just don't need to pay attention to. So the first session, just full on. The second session, with the benefit of hindsight and having gone through a session, you kind of understand, gets a little bit more relaxed. And then by your third session, if not earlier, you know exactly where you need to be and how you need to be prepared. And consequently, the workload decreases dramatically because you've done all the prep and groundwork in the session or two prior. And it's a much more relaxed experience, although the hours, can be still quite long.
When the hours do die off, I imagine at some point is less so you need to micromanage every single thing of your section the whole way through. At some point, sort of eases off. You talked about being able to sort of get away when you can, sort of thing. But what's expected of you when you're not in session? Basically, when the session slows down, or when the sort of after that raise period, but also like when you do not have a platoon, what's expected?
So when you're in session, you're just assigned to that session. There'll be no other expectation of you. If you're not in session, you'll be expected to generally help the company where needed. So at the conclusion of a session, there's an expectation that you're going to bugger off for a little bit and go have some time to yourself and decompress and de-stress from that session. But after that, the companies always, they need help running TCCC lanes. They need help doing weapon handling tests. They need help doing weapon qualification tests. They need help with range days. So fairly frequently there are opportunities to come in and usually for 2-3 hours, help out, socialise with your peers and then bugger off.
Describes what is expected of you, but how would you describe the work-life balance when you get there?
Very poor.
Okay.
Very poor.
Yeah.
But rewarding. It's offset by
working incredibly hard but achieving big things.
Yeah, and you wake up in the morning excited and ready to go into work, and it's a great job, but yeah,
exhausted but excited.
Yeah, exhaustedly excited.
Yeah.
No, it's a great job, but the work-life balance while you're in session is skews heavily towards work.
That rewarding part is interesting, and achieving good things. The standards must be high. We talked about going through the prerequisite courses before you get there to prepare you somewhat, but there's still a high expectation of recruit instructors the whole way through. How do you get, I suppose you get a recruit instructor badge, but more broadly, how's standardisation? What's expected of you in terms of how you instruct?
Right. So there's a heavy emphasis on the formal drill lessons given, the formal weapon lessons given, and also the formal field lessons given. Although that's only a portion of what a recruit instructor is expected to teach recruits, those are what are focused on for standardisation. And the way that's achieved is through moderation. So before you even begin a session, in theory, you should have conducted your OJE lesson. And then throughout the sessions, STP, or the Staff Training Platoon, will come down and moderate you. So they'll observe and assess your lessons, and they'll provide feedback, including whether or not you pass the standard required for delivery of a lesson to recruits.
That's the lessons that or the standardisation that you achieve, and high standards that are constantly. Does it feel like I suppose watched is too strong of an argument, but are you constantly sort of watched by standardisation and making sure you're doing the right thing, or is it more so? Do you get that space and white space you talked about before to really teach the recruits exactly what you want to teach them in some unconventional ways?
You're not constantly watched. It'd be wrong to say you're constantly watched. And you'll typically be aware, at least a few days earlier if you're going to be assessed. But you're constantly around your peers. So people do see what you're doing, but not in a big brother way. I mean, once again, you're working with your fellow section commanders, and typically before you even begin teaching anything to the recruits, you will talk to each other and moderate between each other about what you're going to teach and how you're going to teach it, if variation is possible. And
your peers is an interesting segue, I suppose, with the section commanders more broadly and the body of section commanders. You find in most training institutions the gap between trainee, whether that be trainee officer or recruit, and the next level up is significantly greater than any other sort of organisation. So I'm going to use your example exactly. Recruits and recruit instructors, the gap between them, particularly in the first component, is really high or large. So is there sort of have you observed that sort of tension between section commanders holding each other to account and like all expecting higher things? Is that sort of something you've experienced over your posting?
Yeah, the authority that we're given as recruit instructors over recruits is pretty massive, and with that does come, I suppose, a potential for abuse of power or unacceptable behaviour, and I think in general, recruit instructors and other staff there are really well aware of that. And fortunately don't see any issues typically arise, honestly. But I'm quite confident that if I saw any issues or if any other fellow recruit instructors saw any issues, they'd immediately bring it to attention and hold their peers to account, which I think is a good thing.
So you get paid. So you talked about the stresses of work before, that being that you work in massive hours, and you're talking about there being no real work-life balance effectively, but your ability to sort of go home, maybe not switch off, but go home when you're not needed and out of session. What additional allowances? We always talk about R.I.s get more money. What money do you get at Kapooka as a recruit instructor?
Right, so it comes in three parts: sustainability allowance, or rather, instructor sustainability allowance, recruit instructor disability allowance, and an additional pay grade as well, where you go up a pay group. So in my instance, I'm usually on pay group 6. I'm now on pay group 7, and I get about $23,000 extra per year.
And is that just you purely being posted there, or is it like, do you have to be in session, or how's it sort of work?
That's been posted there in an instructional role.
So that's obviously the allowance, which is, sort of in the instructional roles, you'll get paid that the whole time you're at Kapooka. So normal, I suppose most people will cop a 2-year posting to Kapooka. Is it normal for people to extend, or is it normal people for leave at the end of that 2 years? How does it sort of work?
2 years is the posting, and it is very common for people to request an extension, which I think speaks to the satisfaction that people get from doing the job role.
Want to stay. They learn all those skills to be able to take someone, like you talked about, absolutely treading water at the start, but then get them all the way through that rewarding. How many raises you've done? Is that like fair to say that like it's incredibly rewarding, which keep people there to extend basically?
Yeah, absolutely. They love the job role, and it offers like an employment, a type of employment that you just don't see anywhere else in defence.
If they do stay for a 3rd year, or, coming up to the end of their 2nd year and they've done a significant number of raises, I suppose, what other jobs can they do outside of just being in one of the companies doing ARA raises for, over and over? What other jobs are there available at 1RTB to do for recruit instructors?
So there's a few different jobs. In recruit development wing, we have where I am currently, Digger James platoon. So people who are, or recruits are undergoing remediation or rehabilitation. There's also APCP, Army Preconditioning Program, to get people up to a physical standard required to get up to begin the full-time course. And in addition, AIDP, so the Army Indigenous Development Program, which is a really good program. I believe it's 16 or 17 weeks, which takes Indigenous recruits and gives them a whole bunch of opportunities for development, including education and a whole swathe of things for them, which is really good. In addition to that, we have recruit instructors in the medical training cell. So they teach medical stuff to the recruits. We have the guys in STP, Staff Training Platoon, so they'll do all the moderation. We also have MTS, the Marksmanship Training Section, and they're kind of the section commanders who are the absolute master of the range, and they assist the regular companies during range days.
I suppose a lot of people look from the outside looking in, and we talked about this in the RMC episode as last year as well, but look with rosy coloured glasses at the institution they've been through, and they're like, it's so much easier now, and there's so much, the quality of product coming out is so much lower, and the standard of training they're receiving is significantly less so. I suppose, what would you like to say to those people being in the organisation and doing it for 2 years? What's your sort of, is it is it way easier than it used to be? And, is that the case? Is that true?
Not at all. So that is something that people have been saying for thousands of years, to the point that you can find stone tablets, from ancient Rome, where soldiers are complaining about the standards of the new recruits coming through, which is maybe something I just made up. However, I would like to believe that is the case. No matter what we do, it's always going to be, it was tougher in my day. It was way tougher in my day. Look, I can tell you from my experience personally that 17 years ago, physically was it tougher? Maybe a little bit. Were people a bit meaner? Maybe, like as in the instructors. But the intellectual standards required of me compared to today was nothing. And I think the quality of recruit that we get now is far higher than the quality at my time.
We've talked about a lot of description, how much money you get paid, being a recruit instructor, what the organisation does, what recruits look like, and the standard that comes out. So to recap or to sort of finish the episode up, like what do you wish you knew, or what would you impart on people, either coming back or have an external view about the organisation? What do you want to tell everyone?
The job as a recruit instructor, Kapuka, is way better than you think it is. Way better. And the bad parts that you're imagining are definitely not that bad. It's an incredibly rewarding job, and you get to see that despite what you're going to hear in the units and despite what you're going to hear army-wide, the quality of recruits that we're getting out of here is absolutely higher than it's ever been. And I'm proud of what we do here. It's great.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time today anyway, Jade. And I better let you get back into it.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.